The first letter arrived on a quiet morning in the spring of 1942. It was thin, official, and heavier than it looked. Thomas Reed held it in his hands for a long moment before opening it, already knowing what it would say. Draft notices had been arriving all across the country, names called one by one, ordinary lives interrupted without warning. When he finally read the words, there was no shock, only a slow, steady understanding that his life, as he knew it, had reached a turning point. Thomas lived with his parents on a small farm in Iowa. The land had been in his family for generations. He knew its moods, its seasons, its silences. Before the war, his world had been narrow but full. Early mornings, long afternoons, evenings that smelled of soil and hay. He had plans, though he rarely spoke them aloud. Someday, he thought, he would expand the farm, maybe marry, maybe raise children who would run through the same fields he had. The war did not ask about those plans. When he told his parents, his father nodded once and said nothing. His mother tried to smile, then turned away to hide her tears. That night they ate dinner quietly. Every sound seemed louder than usual. The clink of cutlery, the ticking of the clock. Thomas felt as if he were already halfway gone. Training camp stripped away individuality quickly. Hair was cut, names were replaced with numbers, days were broken into commands and responses. At first, Thomas felt overwhelmed. His body ached constantly. His mind struggled to keep up. But there was comfort in routine. If you followed orders, you survived the day. That was enough. He met men from places he had only heard of on the radio: New York, Alabama, California. They joked, complained, shared cigarettes. At night, some talked about home, others stayed silent. Thomas listened more than he spoke. He was learning something important, though he could not yet name it. Everyone was afraid, but everyone hid it differently. By the time Thomas shipped out, fear had settled into something duller, a constant presence, like background noise. The ocean crossing was long and uneasy. Men joked about submarines, but no one slept deeply. When they finally reached Europe, the air itself felt different, older, heavier. France was not what Thomas had imagined. Villages lay broken, as if time itself had shattered. Stone walls blackened by smoke, roads torn apart by tracks and craters. Children stared with eyes too old for their faces. The first night near the front, Thomas could not sleep at all. Artillery thundered in the distance, each sound vibrating through his chest. Combat did not arrive all at once. It crept in, a patrol here, a skirmish there. The first time Thomas fired his weapon at another human being, he did not think about history or duty. He thought about surviving the next 10 seconds. Later, much later, the meaning of that moment would return to him in fragments. Men fell. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. Thomas learned to move when told, to stop when told, to run even when his legs felt like they would collapse. He learned that courage was often just continuing to move forward despite wanting to lie down and disappear. Winter was the worst. Cold seeped into everything. Fingers stiffened, breath turned sharp and painful. Supplies ran thin. Letters from home were treasured, read again and again until the paper nearly fell apart. Thomas wrote back when he could, careful not to worry his parents. He wrote about the weather, about friends, never about fear. One night during a bombardment, a shell landed close enough to throw Thomas to the ground. When he stood up, his ears rang and the world seemed distant, unreal. A man nearby lay motionless. Thomas stared at him for a moment too long before someone shouted for him to move. That face followed him for years afterward, appearing in dreams without warning. As the months dragged on, Thomas felt himself changing, not dramatically, not in ways others could easily see. Something inside him hardened, then cracked, then reshaped itself. He stopped imagining the future. He focused only on getting through the next hour. Hope became something quiet and fragile, carried carefully. When the war finally ended, the announcement felt unreal. Men cheered, some laughed, some cried openly. Thomas felt neither joy nor sadness at first, only exhaustion, a deep weariness that went beyond the body. The journey home took weeks. Ships, trains, waiting rooms filled with soldiers in various stages of disbelief. When Thomas finally saw American soil again, he felt a strange disconnect. This place had continued without him. Seasons had passed. People had grown older. He wondered where he fit now. Homecoming was gentler than he expected, but also harder. People smiled, flags waved, strangers thanked him for his service. Thomas nodded and smiled back. Inside, he felt like an observer in his own life. He noticed everything, but felt slightly removed from it. At night, the quiet was unbearable. No artillery, no shouting, just silence stretching endlessly. His mind filled the space with memories he did not invite. He slept poorly, waking suddenly, heart racing, unsure where he was. Days blurred together. He worked on the farm, but his movements felt automatic. Friends treated him differently now, with respect, yes, but also distance. They did not know what to say, neither did he. Thomas tried to explain once, haltingly, to his father. The words failed him. His father listened, then placed a hand on his shoulder. They stood there together, saying nothing. It was not a solution, but it was something. As months passed, the world moved on. New concerns replaced old headlines. The war faded into memory for those who had not lived it. For Thomas, it remained close, woven into his thoughts, his reactions, his dreams. He wondered if this was how it would always be.
The years immediately after the war were the hardest, though Thomas did not realize it at the time. At first, he believed that time alone would fix everything, that if he worked hard enough, stayed busy enough, the memories would eventually fade into something distant and manageable. But time, he learned, does not erase things. It only changes the way they live inside you. Thomas began attending local gatherings again, small-town meetings, church on Sundays, seasonal fairs. People welcomed him politely, sometimes warmly, but always with a certain carefulness. He noticed how conversations shifted when he approached, how laughter softened, how topics changed. He was no longer just Thomas, the farm boy. He was Thomas, the soldier who had been to war. That label followed him everywhere, even when no one said it aloud. He tried working longer hours on the farm, believing exhaustion might bring rest. Instead, it only made the nights more restless. Sleep came in short pieces. When it did, it was crowded with fragments of places and faces he could not forget. He woke often before dawn, sitting on the edge of his bed, listening to the house breathe around him. There were days when anger surfaced without warning. Small frustrations felt enormous. A broken tool, a delayed delivery, a careless comment. Thomas did not like this version of himself. He withdrew further, afraid of saying something he could not take back. Silence became his safest space. One afternoon, while in town, he passed a bulletin board outside the post office. A notice caught his eye. Information about veterans' education benefits, classes, training, a different future. He stood there longer than he intended, reading the same lines again and again. The idea frightened him. Change always did now, but staying still frightened him more. When Thomas told his parents he was considering school, his mother's face brightened in a way he had not seen since before the war. His father asked practical questions. How long? Where? What would it cost? They did not push him. They let the decision be his. That quiet support mattered more than they knew.
College was overwhelming at first. The noise, the crowds, the casual confidence of younger students. Thomas felt older than everyone around him, though he was only in his mid-20s. He sat in the back of classrooms, listening carefully, rarely speaking. He worked harder than he needed to, not out of ambition, but because effort felt familiar. Struggle made sense to him. There were moments when the past interrupted without warning. A slammed door that sounded too much like an explosion, a sudden shout in the hallway. His body reacted before his mind could. He learned to manage it quietly, breathing through the tension, reminding himself where he was. No one taught him these techniques. He learned them the way he had learned everything else, through necessity. He met other veterans on campus. They recognized one another easily, even without conversation. Something in the eyes, in the posture. They shared coffee, notes, and sometimes silence. They did not dwell on the war, but its presence shaped their understanding of each other. That shared understanding created a kind of calm. During his second year, Thomas met Eleanor. She was studying education, patient by nature, observant without being intrusive. She did not ask him to explain things he could not explain. She noticed when crowds unsettled him and adjusted without comment. When he woke from bad dreams, she did not demand details. She simply stayed. Their relationship grew slowly. Thomas feared attachment, feared what he might carry into someone else's life. Eleanor seemed to understand this fear without naming it. Over time, trust formed, careful and deliberate. They married quietly, without spectacle. It was enough. After graduation, Thomas returned to farming, this time with new methods and ideas. The land responded well. Work regained its rhythm. Days became structured again, grounded. Eleanor taught at a local school. Life settled into something steady, not perfect, but real. They had children. Thomas struggled at first with the weight of responsibility. The thought of loss hovered constantly in his mind. But fatherhood also anchored him in the present. Children demanded attention, patience, presence. They pulled him forward when he might otherwise have remained trapped in memory. As the years passed, the sharp edges of the war softened, though they never disappeared. Certain dates still brought heaviness. Certain sounds still caused his heart to jump. But Thomas learned to live alongside these things. They were part of him, but they were not all of him. Occasionally, people asked him to speak at local events, memorial days, school assemblies. He accepted rarely, and when he did, he chose his words carefully. He spoke about responsibility, about the cost of conflict, about the value of peace. He avoided glorifying violence. He believed future generations deserved honesty, not mythology. As he grew older, Thomas spent more time walking the fields he had once worked tirelessly. He watched his grandchildren run where he had once run. He listened more than he spoke. When they asked about the war, he answered gently. He wanted them to understand that history was lived by people much like themselves, not distant figures carved in stone. In his later years, Thomas often sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the light change across the land. He thought about the long road from that first letter in 1942 to this quiet moment, about the friends he had lost, about the life he had built, about how survival was not a single event, but a lifelong process. When Thomas Reed passed away, there were no grand ceremonies, just family, a folded flag, and shared memories. His life did not make headlines. It did not need to. It was a life shaped by history, but not defined entirely by it. Across the country, countless others lived similar stories. Veterans who returned, struggled, adapted, and carried on. Their contributions were not always visible, but they were foundational. They built communities, raised families, worked quietly, and remembered deeply. History often measures significance through battles won or lost, but the true legacy of that generation lived on in people like Thomas Reed, in endurance, in quiet strength, in the slow, determined act of choosing to live fully after witnessing humanity at its worst. And that legacy continues, not in monuments alone, but in the everyday peace that followed, maintained by those who understood, more than most, what it had cost.
If this story meant something to you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me for the stories still untold.